Hi, in this video we're going to look back at an application we created some time ago called the login application, and we're going to use the debugger to see if we can use some new features. So the application that we have here is a login page where we can log in a user and either get a success or, in this case, as you can see, a failure. What I want to do is show you how to use the debugger to trace the variables that are in your application, as well as to be able to conditionally break and to log the events that happen, so that way you can make a better informed choice about why your application has problems and you can find the root cause. So let's return to the code of this application called the registration and login app. If you haven't created this one, you have to go back and look at a previous video to see how it was built. Otherwise, let's continue on. So I'm in the controller application here where we can see the process login action. And as you might recall, we had a security service that was able to tell the program whether or not this user was in the database. And so we have a login success or a login failure as the two options for the next step in this application. Let's go to the line here 22, and I'm going to insert a small red dot there. So you have to get exactly in the left margin, and that will put in a breakpoint. So now let's run the application again and see what that breakpoint does. So I have the application running. I need to go to the URL and type in /login following the local host. And so I have max and some password here. So I believe the password was capital password with an exclamation mark. And let's choose login. Now the application stops because that login event was sent to the controller, and we are now highlighting this line 22 where we placed the breakpoint. So let's see what's in here for our values. Now if you were to hover over any other variable that's before this breakpoint, you will see that there is a lot of things that you can look at. So values of different classes. For instance, the connection string is one of the values of the security service DAO. Now what I'm interested in is the user account here. So right now the user model should have a value in it. You should see what I put in as the username was Max and the password was password exclamation mark. Now if you want to trace through what happens next, you click up on the line here at the very top where all the buttons are and find step over. So step over will now join the back into the code, and it will jump to the next line. So the next line that's going to execute is the login success. So let's choose step over again. Let's try it again. Let's try step over. And this time it pops up. So we have now shown the success page for our login. So there are two locations where you can find out what the values of your user model are. So one of them is here, and then the other is down in this window called autos. And it's a view of all of the different items that are currently in memory. So let's return to the application, and this time instead of logging in successfully, I'm going to put in an invalid password. So I'll put in some stuff here and choose login, and let's watch the application run through the execution this time. So once again, it comes to line 22 of the controller and stops. I can see the values now of user as my password now is just a number and the username is still Max. Down below in autos, you can see that there is a new value called user, and you can see what's going on here. So if for some reason your application crashes, this is exactly where you should go. You should look in the values to see what kind of data is being stored and where the execution branches. So right now we expect this login failure to be called. So let's jump over and see what happens next. So sure enough, the yellow line now appears in the login failure, as this is going to be the next thing that's executed. So that's the first use of the debugger, and I think we've shown this before in a previous lesson, but just a refresh, you should be using the debugger every time you try to run an application when something goes wrong or you're trying to figure out how your branching is going on in the logic of the code. Okay, I'm going to stop the application now. And I'm going to remove this breakpoint. So I just click on the red dot, and now we're back to normal execution. Now let's place a breakpoint a little higher. So let's go up to line 20, and I want to put in a breakpoint where the security service is initiated. And so what we're going to demonstrate here is the step in and the step over. So let's run the application and we will try to log in. So we're back to the application running. I'm at the login screen. I put in Max and let's put in an invalid password and choose login. So the application should stop at our breakpoint, and sure enough it does. So now the breakpoint is set at this place where we are going to call the security service. Now the security service, of course, is another class and it has its own methods, and we want to see the code execute in there. Previously we chose step over. If I choose step over, then it will go down to the next line and execute the if statement. Instead of step over, I want to step in. So step into means it will go find the code of the security service. Let's go ahead and try that. So step in, and sure enough, we have a new screen that pops up. Look at the top here. It says we are now in the security service. So what does the security service call? It calls the security DAO, which is another class, and data access object is what its job is. So let's step into this one, and we can go now another level deeper. And so the security DAO now pops up on the screen, and we are going to be able to trace through all of the code here. So if I just choose step over, then I come back to where I was in the previous, which is the security service. If I choose step over again, I come back to the line that says the login service. And so step in and step out are how you're going to dive into code if you want to see routines and classes that are called within classes. So I'm going to step into the application again, and let's go see what's inside of the security DAO. So the security DAO receives something as a parameter, the user model, and let's see what came in there. So sure enough, the user model was passed in here, and it is the Max and his junk password. Let's go ahead and step in one more again, and I'm going to go into the security DAO. So let's step in. Now in the security DAO, I should be able to see the same value called user being passed in. So one level lower and lower, the user model is still passed along. Let's look down at the bottom here, and you can see that we have a list of active variables that are going on here. So we have the connection string, which is a variable that is defined, and then we have a user parameter, and we can see those at the bottom as well as in the code itself. So now I'm going to choose step out, and we should bring ourselves back up a level, and we're back to the login. Let's attempt the login again, and we'll wait till the application stops at the breakpoint. I'm going to step over this time. And let's take a look at security service and open up security service, and you can see that the level of items below it now shows up as a kind of a hierarchy as well. So we can see the security service calls the DAO, and both of those are listed as one above the other. Okay, I'm going to stop the program again, and we're going to remove the breakpoint and put it in a different place. So let's remove this breakpoint, and now let's go into the security DAO class. What I'm interested now is to trace the actual details of the database operations. So let's come down to where we have line 33, and it looks like we have a try and a catch area. So we're going to find out if any of this will work and if we can trace any errors that are occurring in our database. So I want to check two things here. I want to look at the connection string or the connection object, and then I also want to follow the operations of finding a user. So we'll run the application, and let's stop here at this breakpoint. So I'm running the application, I'm at the login screen, I put in Max and the correct password, which was password ! And I choose login. So when we get to the processing of the database now, we come to a stopping point and the program halts. So let's take a look here at what's in connection. So connection is highlighted, and this is a very complex piece of code or a class because of all the different properties that are here. So what can we recognize as valid information or invalid? So for one thing that we have done is the connection string. So this here is coded up on line 13, and if for some reason the connection were failing, we could verify that we had the right connection string or not. And so that's one item. So you can see other things about the application connection here, such as, for instance, which database are we working with, which is test. Is there anything else that makes sense? If we had to go and do some more data analysis here, we could probably use this as a great point to find out if something was wrong or not. Let's skip over here and watch how the program runs now. So we're trying to open a connection. That's what it does. And then we have a new line that says reader. So let's take a look at what reader now has. So I've just skipped over reader. Let's open reader and see if that makes any sense. So reader has some values. So field count, that kind of tells us something. That tells us how many different columns are in the database. Well, there should be 3 of them. It has rows. It means the reader was successful in reading something from the database. Is closed, obviously, tells us that we're still in an active connection to the database. Records affected, so -1 means we didn't do any updates or edits. Visible field count, once again, we have 3. Let's see what the results view looks like. So let's open up that. So we have a results that tells us about what we've fetched from the database. And eventually we're going to get down to values. So there it is. So the values of what was actually fetched from the database can be seen right here in the debugger. And we captured somebody in the database whose ID was 1, his name was Max, and he had a valid password. So the property has rows was the only thing we asked about, but you can see that there are lots of properties in a reader here, this reader object. So let's continue on. It says here we're on this line with the yellow code, if it has rows, and we can see that has rows was set to true because it did actually read 1 row. Let's skip over and go to the next line. And now success has been switched from, or it's going to be switched, we should say, it's going to be switched from false to true. It was set false here up on line 18. And now as soon as we skip over here, it will switch it from false to true. Let's see if that actually does. It does. Okay, so we have now finished the try area. Now, if for some reason the database fails, we will get a catch as well. So let's stop the program and introduce an error. I'm going to introduce an error in the SQL statement. So select from DB users. Well, let's just put in an X in the name of the users. So it's a mistype. And we'll run the code again. So the application's up and running. I'm at the login screen. Let's choose login with Max. So we're going to get to this breakpoint here and stop. Now remember, we have an invalid SQL statement up above. So when we try to do an execution on this, this should stop. Let's go ahead and skip over again, step over. We're going to open the database. So far, no problem. Now we're going to execute the reader. And the reader is going to fail because the SQL statement was invalid. There was a wrong table name. So the try has now exited, and we are going to enter into the catch area. So let's see if there's any value we can find in the exception statement. So far it says EX is set to null. It means we haven't executed this line. So let's skip over, and then we are going to be able to see the execution. So what do we have here for a value? So let's open it up, and the important line is called the message. And it says invalid object name DBO users XS. And so sure enough, the typo was caught and was sent back as the execution or the exception error message. So if you, for example, here have a problem with your SQL statement, you won't be able to identify that unless you are running the debugger. So let's stop the application and let's go back and fix our problem here. So users was the original name. Let's keep it correct so it'll actually work. So let's switch back into the controller and let's come down into the area where we're processing to see if we have a success or a failure in the login. So what I'm going to set next is called a conditional breakpoint. So let's see. First of all, I want to remove all breakpoints. So let's go up to the debug menu and let's choose delete all breakpoints. So if there were some others that were in the other modules of the program, they're now gone. So I've cleared all breakpoints. So let's say I want to go to the success area. So This code will only execute if there is a valid login. Well, I don't want to stop the program. I just want to have a message that is recording all of these successful logins. You could do the same for failure if you wanted to check to see if somebody was trying to hack into your system. But I'm just going to record the positives, the successes right now. So let's hover over here, and we can see an option called the cog, or it's a gear, you might say. The settings. Let's choose settings and see what comes up. So now we have an option to say, I will break or I will do something only if certain conditions are met. So let's check the item called conditions. Now the conditional expression says what happens if this is true. So here is an example. It says if the value of x was 5 or 5, then we would stop. Let's say I want to stop here only if the user Max was logged in. So I would say the condition here is user.username equals Max. So this breakpoint will stop anytime the user called Max is logged in successfully. Well, I'm not really interested in stopping the program when Max logs in. I just want to know when he logs in. So I could go to the actions here and add something else. So for instance, show a message in the output window. That would be nice. So let's put in a message, for instance, to say Max just logged in. So we could have a success or failure message or whatever. And then I'm going to leave this checked here where it says continue code execution. So really, we're not stopping here. This is no longer a, quote, breakpoint. This is just a log point, you might call it then. So let's go ahead and close this, and we'll run the app, and we'll try to log in as Max. So I've got the application up and running. We're ready to log in as Max, so let's go ahead and choose Login. So the message should just continue on now. There's no breakpoint, but we should see something in the output window. So I see we have a login success. Now, where did that actually log the information? So I switch back down into here to the output. There's a whole bunch of messages that come, but one of them that is important has this line here that says Max just logged in. Now, I'm sure there's ways you could put time and everything in that. And actually, there is a whole system for logging information called NLog. And we will look at how to log events in the next tutorial. So NLog is a more sophisticated way to track events such as success or failures on logins. So I want to look at one more thing, which is called the call stack. And so we'll go back into the DAO application here, or the module. And let's go to the very end where it's got the success, and we can put a breakpoint on return success. So let's go ahead and run the application and log in. All right, the application's up and running. I've got the login page. Max is ready to log in. Let's click it. And the breakpoint, sure enough, triggers. So now we should be able to do like we did before if we want to go back and look at the values of any of the variables. What I want to look now is what's called the call stack. So let's take a look here at the debug menu. Lots of things to choose here. And what we're going to pick though is the Windows area. And I want to go down to call stack. So what is a call stack and how does it help us? Well, the call stack appears down in the bottom. It tells us which module called which. So you can see that we have the first a line here. Let's make this a little bit bigger so we can read it and see if we can interpret what's going on here. So let's take a look here starting at the bottom. So this item here is got the name called process login from the controller. So the controller is the person that's the earliest in the call stack. And we did the action called process registration and login. And line 22 is where we then branched into the next module. So what was the next module? It was this one here. And we can follow through and find the line called security service. So security service was the next module that was invoked. And we are currently at line 17. Well, what happened at line 17? Well, apparently line 17 said we're going to now invoke the security DAO. And so the stack says the current application or the current module is at the top. The one that called it is the one below it. And then the one that called that one was below there. So the call stack tells you literally the stack of items that are currently in operation. So when the DAO is done, it will be popped off the stack. And we will continue on to the next. So let's go ahead and jump forward and see what happens when we step over. So if we step over, we're going to leave the DAO. So look at the call stack now. The DAO is no longer in the stack. It was popped off because it finished its job. And now we are in the security service, and the security service is still in action, so that is the top item on our call stack. If I skip over again and a couple of clicks with that, we should be out of the security service, and now the call stack only has one item left on it. It is the validation or the process login action. And so that is now the only item on the stack. So that one, if we skip over and skip over, we should then get to the page where we show the login, and now the call stack looks like it's empty. I think it's empty. Yes, it is. Okay, so that's what the call stack can do. It tells you who is being invoked by whom. So what have we learned from this video? Well, first of all, we can set breakpoints at strategic places where we think we may have problems. We can see the values of data, so we can look at the contents of variables. We can also see error messages as they occur, so we can look and find out what happens in our exceptions. Also, we set a conditional breakpoint, so that way it doesn't always trigger. It can trigger when a certain value is met, such as the username was max. And then we can also tell it not to even stop at a breakpoint. We can use conditional breakpoints to log messages. And so every time there's a success or failure login, in our example, we put something into the console log. And then lastly, we looked at the call stack, so you can see which items are calling which other items in your program. So the debugger gives you a great view inside your code and will save you literally hours of mystery when it comes to trying to find out where the problems are. So in the rare event that you create a syntax error or create a logic error in your code, your debugger will help you out a lot. So the next thing we're going to do is look at some of the NLog features. So logging at a little bit more higher level, a more sophisticated way to manage what the performance is of your application. So that's coming up soon.